So we are celebrating 9 months of sobriety, and you have some questions, right, that we're going to go through?
Yep, we're going to go through some questions, get your thoughts where you're at now, and get some perspective.
Yay. It's
Okay,
weird. I'm not used to being interviewed. I'm usually the one doing the interviewing.
welcome to the podcast. Okay, okay. First question: what has been the biggest obstacle in the past 9 months? With from start to finish, is there one that's been consistent? Is there one that's been a big one? What's kind of been the biggest obstacle?
Oh, I feel like at this point, it's more become just a way of life. It was definitely a lot harder in the beginning, but at this point, I think the biggest obstacle for me, anyways, is just how other people kind of interact with me now that I'm sober.
Okay.
So I've noticed a lot lately people talking about alcohol and acting like sobriety is kind of a burden to me. And so it's just been interesting being around other people and kind of their perspective of me and sobriety. Because now, I mean, it is just a way of life. I don't really struggle with it so much anymore. I have no desire to really be around it, but I still feel like people kind of tiptoe around me and around the topic of, alcohol and sobriety. So really that's probably been the biggest hurdle or adjustment is kind of other people's perspective.
Okay. Okay. So with other people's perspective, then how have you gone about kind of dealing with it then? So that's probably a big one, right? Regardless
Yeah,
of how far you're into it, it's always what are other people thinking of it?
I kind of have just had to build a thicker skin. There's part of me that wants to snap at people sometimes and let them know what's up. But it's also, you pick and choose your battles. Sometimes people don't necessarily have bad intentions, they just don't really understand, and so it's more just realizing that some people just don't understand sobriety and that's okay. Doesn't need to be an argument or anything like that. So sometimes I just usually will let it go. Really, I've had to learn to just let things go.
Next one, what's been the biggest asset, during this whole time? Like, what's been the biggest thing that you've been able to stick on to help you go and stay consistent with it?
Honestly, I just feel like my life has changed a lot since becoming sober. Like I literally changed my entire environment. I stopped hanging out with people who all they do is drink. I stopped going to bars. I stopped going to parties with alcohol. Like I literally have just completely shifted my whole life so that it's not really much of a factor anymore. And
Yeah.
so I feel like just figuring out what I like to do now that I'm sober and figuring out the hobbies that I like. And um, I mean, really, that's been the biggest like help for me is just being in a healthy environment now and being able to spend time on hobbies and things that I enjoy doing. Like I have so much more time now that I quit drinking. And so I would say environment and spending time on things I enjoy doing has been the biggest help.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
You, of course, my
Hey.
loving
Hey. Oh.
husband. He's my biggest cheerleader and supporter of my sobriety. So thank you.
Of course. So how do you see alcohol now? What's kind of your perspective of it compared to maybe a year ago where you're at?
So I feel like I always talk about Annie Grace and This Naked Mind, but it's because that really has been like huge in my sobriety. Her book, This Naked Mind, really just dissects alcohol. It completely pulls apart all of the false beliefs that we have about alcohol and why we drink. And she really explains the science behind it. So now at this point, when I think of alcohol, I literally just look at it as a poison because that's what it is. And I feel like a lot of people just don't want to face the truth or the reality that that's what it is. But when you look at it for what it really is, it's a poison. And for me, I've always been very into health and fitness and very aware of the things that I put in my body. But for so long, I just didn't want to acknowledge the fact that alcohol is a poison.
You know what's interesting? To cut you off real quick,
But
it made me think about, I've seen it a lot, whether it's people on TV or interviews or just people around the office, and they'll say, I don't do drugs. I mean, but I drink and this. They don't associate the two together.
not at all.
Why do you think that is? Like, why do you think there is a separation between drinking and maybe other kinds of drugs?
Honestly, I think it's just because of our culture, like there's so much marketing and advertising. I don't want to get way too into it, but if you think of like the pharmaceutical industry, like the drugs that they give us are so, I mean, they are pretty bad for us and bad for our health, but there's so much money to be made that they do it anyways. And it's the same with alcohol. There's just so much money that goes into it so that the more that they can make it seem normal and the more that they can market it to people, the more money in their pockets. So really, I mean, alcohol's been around forever and it's always been just normal in culture and society. And that's why I really think the sober movement or sober curious movement is so important because it's getting people to like actually question their
Yeah.
relationship with alcohol, like actually question, why am I putting a poison in my body? Because for so long, nobody's even questioned it. It's just a thing that we do in our culture and it's so normal. But now, since I've been sober, just seeing the marketing that's out there for alcohol is like appalling because now I know what it is and I know what it's doing and I
Yeah.
know how toxic it is and bad it is for us as a culture, but it's just so normalized.
So tying that in, then how do you think it's changed your mindset? And you kind of have tapped into it already, but your overall mindset on maybe how you go about life right now, how has it changed compared to, again, maybe your darkest times, maybe a year ago, whenever it may have been? What's been the biggest difference?
I feel like now my life is more about self love and listening to my body and figuring out what I need. But once you stop putting a poison in your body, you really do start to love yourself more. And it's not just physical, it's mental. And I start to pay attention to myself more and listen to my body and see like what's going on. Like I meditate more now and I used to never be able to do that. It was like I was so disconnected from myself when I drink. So now it's totally different. I feel more connected to myself than I ever have before.
Yeah. And you're getting really good at doing that too. Like
Yeah.
sit there for an hour and just meditate and just kind of disappear, you know.
I've also become way better at communication.
Mhm.
I feel like before when I used to drink, I was drinking a lot to, numb pain and avoid issues in my life. And now that I don't have that crutch anymore, I find myself a lot better at communicating and putting how I'm actually feeling into words. And that's a skill that I've really had to learn recently, which is crazy because I'm what turning 28 and I'm just now learning some of like the most crucial skills that are needed in life.
Which is wild though, right? Because most people, or a good chunk of people, go their whole lives without knowing that.
It's true.
Maybe
It's
they know to a certain degree, but it's too scary to go down that route to really see themselves for who they are, right?
Yep, exactly. And the emotions part of it is the biggest thing that I've noticed is just there's no longer suppressing or ignoring. And honestly, from the people that I talk with, that seems to be a main thing when you get sober is like you now feel like we didn't feel before. We were always numbing and not dealing with things. And then now when we get sober, we're just left with all these emotions. And as adults, we don't know how to deal with it, which is so crazy to me, but it's a reality. Like when you numb yourself for so long, you are now having to learn these basic skills that we should have had all this time, but now we're having to learn or relearn as adults.
So would you say then, I mean, with all that being in play, what would you say is the biggest drawback or maybe negative of quitting drinking?
Hmm.
Because there's a lot of clarity coming from it, a lot of good, it sounds like. What are the negatives?
I honestly, there are no negatives. I think in my earlier sobriety, I would have maybe said, um, lack of connecting with other people or not being able to have fun with it without alcohol. But literally at this point, after knowing everything I know, like you can't unlearn that alcohol is a toxin, and I've taken every belief that I've ever had about alcohol and the benefits that it could have, and I've torn them apart. And so they're literally not true anymore. So once you realize that any of the false beliefs that we have about alcohol are not true, there's literally nothing in my opinion good that comes from it. So at this point, I wouldn't say that there's anything.
So what if someone said then, that's great and all, Demi, sounds like you got some clarity but I like to have fun. I like to go out and have fun and drink and it's not the end of the world and this and that. What's kind of the perspective around that or how would you approach that conversation? Or
So
what takes place at that point?
I do believe there are people that can drink and not go out and completely destroy their life.
Sure, sure.
For me and a lot of people that I know that are trying to get sober, they've nearly destroyed their life. And so
Or
there are people out there who can drink casually and not destroy everything. And for those people, even for them, even for people who can drink in moderation, like I still challenge them to question why
yeah.
they drink, because everybody has a reason for why they drink, but really it comes down to it is a toxin. Like it's not good for you. It's not good for your body.
Do you think there's any way of do you think it's possible to drink without, in one angle or another, covering up some kind of something about who you are? Does that make sense?
I guess it just depends on what you believe. At this point, I believe that we as humans are equipped with all the tools that we need to live and survive. And I think a lot of people do drink for fun. Like I used to drink to have fun, but there was also a part of me that was drinking because I felt like I was socially awkward or I thought it would be more fun if I drank. So once you kind of take it away and strip it back, I mean, those maybe you are socially awkward, but when you drink, you're just covering it up basically. So if you say you're socially awkward, but then you don't drink, it actually helps you build the skills that you need to communicate more effectively and not be so socially awkward.
That's kind of what I was asking. Is there any way that you're able to drink without in some way or another covering up a route that you could be working on to almost find the same answer? Might take longer to get to that point, but you'd have more clarity on who you are.
Yeah, for sure. And then I also think that there are a lot of people out there who just don't question it. There are some people who, like I said, they can drink moderately and not really have a problem with it. And if they've never been around with somebody who has an addiction or somebody who has a problem, it's not even on their radar to question it.
What do you think the biggest difference is from someone that can just drink it here and there and people who may go into it too deep? Do you think it has anything to do with trauma, or
100%.
do you think that's the differentiatory?
Yeah,
Like from
I
your
I do
experience,
think
anyway. Like,
I do think trauma and lack of connection are the root of most, if not all, addiction.
hmm
I feel like when you encounter people who really, really struggle with an addiction, if you dig deep and pull away the layers, there usually is some type of trauma or suppressed emotions that they haven't been able to process. So, I mean, getting sober is not drinking alcohol is the easy part, you know? actually having to work through all the pain, all the suppressed emotion, trauma, learning the new skills, like that's the real hard stuff. That's where you have to really do the work.
It's kind of what we've talked about is like taking steroids versus just eating clean, getting the right sleep, working out.
Yep.
The end goal is roughly the same, but the results that come from it, there's
Yep.
all heavier results that come from it on a shorter time frame.
Yep. Exactly.
So you're at 9 months now. Do you feel like you can hit a year?
Can I hit a year?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
What's the biggest obstacles you see of hitting maybe a next or full year, 5 years, 10 years, life?
I do think that over time, the longer that we stay sober, we start to kind of forget what our life used to be like when we drank.
Sure.
So it's easy the longer you go to kind of forget all the pain and forget all the chaos that we created. We forget how shitty our life actually was.
Do you
And
think,
then
sorry to cut you out. Do you think you're forgetting it or do you think you're healing yourself? Or both?
I think both. But I think that over time, like our memories of what things used to be do kind of fade. And so for me, I've seen a lot of people that, have been sober for a while and then they start thinking, well, maybe I can handle it now, maybe I can moderate, maybe it'll be okay. But it's because we're forgetting what a disaster our life was before. And
So how do you avoid that then? How do you avoid tripping the same stair?
I mean, I don't want to have to remember all the bad times, but at the same time, I feel like that's what keeps me on track. And for me, I tried moderating so many times because I didn't want to give it up forever. I was terrified to get sober forever. So I literally tried. I tried so many times to drink a different type of liquor or drink only on certain days of the week. That's what we call the bargaining phase. It's where you're bargaining with yourself because you don't want to give it up.
Sure.
And so I think, yeah, it is really just remembering that we can't moderate. And honestly, it's not a risk that I'm willing to take. I
Yeah.
don't want to find out. Like I worked so hard to get sober. I've worked so hard to build this amazing life that no longer includes alcohol. And the thought of jeopardizing that, like I don't ever want it's playing with fire. It's totally playing with fire and I don't want to risk losing everything that I've gained
Yeah.
seeing if I can moderate. It's not worth it to me.
Well, you've done a really good job at kind of slowly taking away any kind of risk factors, that like you're saying you can't get wet if you don't get near the pool. You've removed the pool altogether. So there's no really risk that could come that way.
And that's harder for some people. And for me, for so long, I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to completely change my life. I didn't want to stop hanging out with my friends. I didn't want to quit working where I was. Like it would have required so much change. And for a long time, I was scared to do that. But I finally got to the point where I was just so fed up of failing time and time again to where none of that stuff really mattered to me. Like I literally made sobriety my number one priority. And from here on out, that's how it's going to be.
The negative of drinking was a lot heavier than maybe the pluses of hanging around certain people or, you know,
Totally. And the other thing that happens when you get sober, I mean, for me, I had worked in, the nightlife, bar industry for
yeah,
years. So naturally, the people that I knew in my circle were from there as well. And that's all that we did together was drink and party. And we really didn't know each other outside of that. So when you get sober, you start to realize who your real friends are. And a lot of people just naturally fall away. And to a lot of people, that's a scary thought because you think of just like losing everybody. But if you get sober, I mean, that's doing something better for yourself and better for your life. And if people aren't supporting you in that, is that really a friend? I don't think so.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's interesting, like you said, and you mentioned that before, is some of the people you're around were some of your best friends, right? But you also, outside of the club scene or the bar scene, like you had no idea who they actually were.
It's so crazy to me to
Almost,
think.
it's almost like a fake story in your head of I'm going to lose all these friends when they weren't really friends to begin with, just
That's
because
the
of the
thing.
depth of who you were with them, right?
Yeah, that it's when you're constantly drinking and partying with people and that's all you do, it's a very superficial relationship. So when you take the booze away, there's literally no substance left. And
So
you see it very clearly, very quickly.
yeah, do you think it's more the fear of losing what they think it is compared to the bonus of like gaining what really could be?
I mean, it's all we know in the moment.
Yeah.
It's very scary. It's very, I mean, a lot of people are fearful of that. So
We
it is brave and courageous, to get sober because it is scary, and that's what keeps most people from doing it.
yeah. Yeah, that's we've kind of dug into that a little bit, even just like say relationships where it's good, but it's not what you ideally want, but it's
Yeah.
good enough. The fear of letting go what's good enough is scary because you're going, well, what if I get nothing after this? The fear of I have some friends in the club scene. If I let go of them, what if I have nobody? I'd rather have something than nothing, right?
And that's what kept me drinking for so damn long, is I was scared of what would happen if I quit.
Hmm.
And it was scary because, like, I ended a 3-year relationship. I switched jobs. I moved into a rental with two complete strangers that I met on Facebook Marketplace. But I woke up one day and I knew that if I wanted my life to change, if I wanted to get sober, then I had to do it. And it was like a leap of faith, but it was the best thing I ever could have done.
I agree. So do you feel at this point then, do you feel like anybody can do it? Do you feel it's just kind of a certain breed of people drinking? Like what's your kind of take on the whole perspective of what this all is?
So when it comes to getting sober, it is, like I said, I sound like a broken record, but when it's all it's very scary. And
Yeah.
that's what keeps people from doing it. So I feel like I feel like anybody can get sober, but you really, really have to want it. You can't be half in, half out. It just doesn't work. It's powerful. Alcohol is powerful. It has a strong hold on people, especially when you've done it for so long. So when it comes to getting sober, like you really have to want it. You have to want it for yourself, not because somebody else told you you have to. You have to love yourself enough to make the decision for yourself.
So with when you were going through it, then it's almost like the pain of losing all that you knew wasn't as painful as what it was causing you, right? Like it was almost less scary to jump into the unknown than it was to stay in this dark cave.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And before I got sober this time and stayed sober, I had tried so many times before, but a lot of the times it's because I felt like I had to. It was when I would black out and crazy things would happen and my family or whatever would intervene and say, got to get sober, or my ex would threaten that he would leave me if I didn't get sober. So I was always trying to get sober, but really it's because there were outside influences to where I felt like I had to. And so it finally just had to get to the point where I wanted a better life for myself. I didn't want to stay stuck in the cycle and I had to do it for me. It really came down to being like a selfish decision where nothing else mattered. Nothing else mattered except me getting better and getting sober.
So how do you get to that place? If somebody's going through that hamster wheel of right now in the moment, they're going, I want to quit. I want to get through it, but when the time comes after a long working week and they're all going to go out, their friends are going to go out and drink, and everyone's getting together, and they're back in the same hamster wheel, and they're going to be back in the regretting thoughts. Like, how do you get to that place of complete clarity of like, it's finally time to jump? Is it rock bottom? Is it just a matter of knowing yourself? Like,
I when you think of rock bottom, I think it's different for
because
everybody, and
that I would consider rock bottom for people. Like,
yeah.
you have some scary stories that have come with it.
Mhm.
You know,
I don't feel like people have to hit a rock bottom. I feel like they just have to get fed up enough to want to quit. There almost has to come a level of anger and frustration to where you're no longer going to take it anymore. And for some people that takes longer than others, but I don't think people have to hit a rock bottom. I mean, for me, I had some terrible things happen, but I still had a job. I still had friends. I still went to the gym. I I still had my life together. I didn't completely ruin everything. And
hmm
so for me, I don't feel like I ever really hit a rock bottom. I just got fed up enough with myself. I was sick of feeling like shit all the time. I was sick of hurting people. I was sick of letting myself down.
yeah.
I just got to a point where I was like, I can't do it anymore. I can't do it anymore.
So do you think it really came down to then a change of environment gave you enough time to be away from it without the temptations to really be able to go, okay, this is the right decision?
So that was the hardest part for me in the past was my whole life revolved around alcohol. So when I quit, like my environment didn't change. So the people I was hanging out with were still drinking all the time and talking about it. And when we would hang out with friends, like the normal thing was to go to the bars. And I mean, for me in the beginning, going to bars and being sober was torture. Like it sucked. I hated it. But that was just it. And I would rather, give in and drink than feel that freaking.
Now there's pressure, right? Now there's pressure of why aren't you drinking? All the temptations of it being fun or this or that are right next to you.
I mean, the beginning is your most fragile time. And for me, because I had tried so many times and failed, I knew I couldn't be around it. Like I had seen the patterns so many times. I just knew that I couldn't be around it. And for me, that's what it took to get past the cravings. And I think that is the case for a lot of people, but it's very hard to change your surroundings enough to where you're not around alcohol because it's unfortunately, and it pisses me off more than anything, it's everywhere. It is freaking everywhere, and it's hard to get away from.
Well, you've mentioned that before, which is interesting coming from my perspective and not, really having it in my life. And you're
Hmm.
like pointing out in movies and kids movies and commercials and like everything.
Yeah, it's literally everywhere. But I mean, for people in early sobriety, when you're just trying to cut the cravings and be away from the temptation, honestly, you just have to want it enough and you have to care about your sobriety enough to where if you know that there's going to be alcohol at a party or that you're going out to dinner with your friends and they're going to drink, like if you think at all that you might be tempted, just don't go. Like literally just don't go.
It's almost prep, beforehand. So you don't
100%.
even go into that position to begin with, right?
Yep, exactly.
If you don't know how to swim, don't go to the pool party, right?
Exactly.
Any last words for anybody listening that's just kind of on that brink or kind of curious about it? Any
I
tips,
just
tricks you would want to say to them?
I just want to strongly encourage people, whether they have a problem or not, to just think about the reasons why you drink. And what I tell a lot of people is to literally just make a list. Make a list of all the reasons you like drinking, all the reasons you don't, and then really ask yourself, are those true or not? Because when I wrote down my list of all the reasons why I liked drinking and asked myself if they were really true, what it came down to was those were all false beliefs that I had told myself to kind of justify it in a way. But
Yeah.
when I was really brutally honest with myself and asking myself, is this true? The answer was no every time. And so for people who have a problem or don't, like I just encourage you to think about what alcohol is as an actual substance, as a toxin, and then ask yourself, what are you benefiting? What are you getting out of it? And
Perfect.
also, how much better could your life be if you didn't drink?
Clarity where you're at now, clarity where you want to go.
Yep.
Very nice. Well, thank you for having me on, Ms. Demi.
Thank you for interviewing me.